alert button. Welcome, everyone. Happy, what day is it? Tuesday? Is it Tuesday? Happy Tuesday. And thanks for joining us for the webinar today. I think that I officially called this it's number 5 in the series, Health Literacy versus the Lookup Generation. But what I need to tell you is that my thinking on this is evolving every time I talk to you all. And I'm thinking nowadays that this is really about health literacy for the lookup generation. And where I started on this was like, given the fact that young people today are the quote-unquote lookup generation, do they even need health literacy? And then I'm like, okay, yeah, I think that they do, but I don't think it's health literacy like maybe we think it is. And I'm looking for pushback, I'm looking for engagement around this idea, but you can see what I put in here is my little image indicators, right? WebMD and IMDb as being 2 examples of how the lookup generation functions these days. And as I have come to do in all of these sessions, I just want to get your brains kick-started before we do anything else and ask you, what does this have to do with the adolescent well visit? Okay, WebMD, very obvious what that might have to do with the adolescent well visit, but tell me, these things as a group, this whole lookup deal, this whole, what does IMDb have to do with any of this? What do you think? Give me some chat. I'm looking for you guys to jump in the chat box. Tell me what you think. Where am I going here? And folks who are not adolescent well visit focused, more on this in a second, but if you're not, if you're a public health person, working at community level, doing whatever, what do you think this has to do with it, right? What is the lookup generation? What are we getting at here? Oh, all attendees versus all participants? Oh.
Yeah, sorry for that confusion, everyone. If you would like to chat and respond, if you could type in the chat box and select all participants, that way Glynis will also see your comments as the speaker.
So were there some comments? I don't know. I was like, oh, I don't know if anyone's chatting.
Yeah, so some of the comments we have are youth figure they don't need a doctor to check their health.
Right on.
Providers often have to explain preconceived ideas teens have from the web. They look to movies as a source of information.
Oh,
easier to look up something than to ask a provider. Instant gratification.
Right on. Absolutely. Thank you. Fabulous comments. Even broader than where I was going. So, woohoo. Everyone here know IMDb? Everyone use it? I mean, somebody brought up the movie thing, and clearly everybody knows what WebMD is, right? And I think that really is where I was trying to go with this, right? AYA, adolescents and young adults, as an audience, are super good at this stuff. And media and the way information is being dealt with now has adjusted based on how technology has made this possible, but also there's like a codependence between the way adolescents and young adults are engaging with this stuff and how these tools are keeping up with them or driving them, and it's a back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So thank you for jumping in. This whole let's chat on the webinar thing is just another example of how technology has changed the nature of these sort of things. So thank you for doing that. All right, so greetings from Minnesota. No, it doesn't look like this right now, but it does a lot of the time, as you all know. It is fall. I'm hoping everybody else has fall that's beautiful like it is here. And speaking of Minnesota, this is my time to once again promote the fact that the Women's National Basketball Association championship playoffs are happening right now, and of course Minnesota does have the best team in the league. No, I'm both kidding and not kidding. Playoffs are happening right now. Sunday is going to be the start of the last series. Thank you, Sally, and everyone who is tolerating or enjoying my promotion of women's athletics. But also on the screen here, in addition, are the logos for the groups that I work with, and folks that are, we had that fall thing in Texas once, nice, Carol. The grant that funds this webinar is specifically the Adolescent and Young Adult Health National Resource Center. Thank you, HRSA, MCHB, and they're funding this work that's focused on National Performance Measure 10, which is the Adolescent Well Visit, and we are working with our colleagues at AMCHIP and UCSF and UVM to support states that are trying to increase well visit rates among adolescents and young adults. And for those of you that aren't that familiar with me or my work, because I have a background in marketing communications, I spent a lot of time developing strategic plans, but also just creating straight up communication materials, whether that's for a community organization, for my fellow researchers, or for the state health department. This is all, of course, because of my background in advertising and marketing, and that's getting so distant, I'm not sure I can even talk about it that way anymore. But this series and this work has given me this opportunity to go back to my roots and really study up on what marketing, advertising, promotional folks are thinking about when they're thinking about adolescents and young adults as an audience for today. Now, folks that have been on these calls before, this is about where you can zone out. But can I see hands up? Who? Let's play with the hands up feature. Who has been on this call before or been on one of these calls before? Everyone know how to use the hands up feature? Carol does. Carol's on it. I see Carol. I see Haley. I see Julie, Melissa, Paula Ray. Ooh, Sarah. Oh, lots of them. Okay, I'm not going to read any more names because it's getting extensive here. And all right. Hey, Tiffany. Okay. So a bunch of you have been here. Folks that have been here, you can zone out for a few minutes, surf, do whatever. I will tell you when to pay attention again. Folks that have not been here, this is the fifth in a series. We started off by looking at the generational segments that create adolescents and young adults. Millennials you've all heard of, but founders are the teenagers of today. They're sometimes called Gen Z, iGen, lots of different names. And what we were looking at here was how their approach and mentality and values and activities and all that sort of work is disrupting marketing as it exists when I was doing it. And the memes that you see here are sort of evidence of the way that information is being presented and disseminated and spread. The second issue seminar was about co-creation, which again brings to those of us in the adolescent health world as being like youth engagement. What we're seeing is the marketing folks are now realizing that they have to engage young people as equals to co-create both products and marketing to be effective. And this was a cool thing for me personally because we're so big into youth engagement, youth development, youth leadership here, where the idea that co-creation is greater than youth engagement comes from the concept that with youth engagement, it's like we engage young people. With co-creation, we change how we do stuff to let them in and work on them. So, I mean, and work on stuff together with us before. All right. Number 3, relevance equals experiences plus sharing. Getting at the whole, back in my day, there was a coolness factor to having brands and identity, things like that, where today relevance isn't about a cool factor, it's about tapping into young people's desire for unique and resonant experiences and their ability to share those experiences with everybody else. We may all be all selfies, terrible, they're so vain and blah, 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 when in fact that whole idea of a selfie is about sharing who you are, where you are, what you're doing, all of that sort of work, and it becomes social validation. So for us in public health, how do we become relevant? One of the strategies to consider is, do we provide an experience that young people resonate with, and do we make it possible for them to share it? Number 4, F your beauty standards. Yes, I did use foul language in this session, and I'm going to try not to do it so much today. At any rate, this was really a discussion about how the marketers and the demographers are studying the changes that are happening, influenced a lot by technology and media, and how young people's expression, engagement, and demonstration of their values is coming out through their activism, through their branding, through their identity, through their sharing, through their experiences, all of that sort of work, which leads us up to today, episode number 5. I can't stop saying episode. I don't know why. All right. Boring stuff for just a minute. Marketing. We use marketing in the title here, and I want to be clear with everybody that when I say marketing, I do not mean messaging. Marketing, and my version of the definition is in the big text, is how you get people to buy your stuff. And it includes considering or being smart or strategic or planful in how you price your stuff, what your stuff actually is, your product, right? Does it have an appeal? Does it meet a need? All that sort of stuff. We'll look at that in a second. How you promote it, that's where messaging comes in, right? Promotion is, messaging comes up and under promotion, and then places where people actually buy it, do it, use it, et cetera. Okay, so when you're thinking, oh, this is about messaging or my communications campaign, just want to be clear that that's one small part of a larger issue. They call these the 4 Ps. Sometimes there's 5 Ps. Sometimes there's 22 Ps. Again, it's evolving because of the way marketing is changing because of technology and young people. But there it is, marketing. Now, I have been using, people have been seeing this tool, and folks that are not paying attention, just one little thing for a second. This marketing analysis, and I'm going to show you this in a second, and this is going to be downloadable to everybody and anybody. But this marketing analysis worksheet has been evolving over time. And what I was just talking about a minute ago with the price, product, promotion in place, you can see those things called out in this little document right here. Everyone's seeing this, right, Rena? I got this going on. And so, you know, we're like, okay, the product is the well visit. And what we tend to think then is, well, we're talking about what comes into the product itself, you know, the components, right? They go in for a well visit, they get a physical assessment, right? Height, weight, BMI. They get some immunizations. If they're lucky, they do one of those heads screenings, right? They talk about risks and strengths and get a little counseling. And then MDs, medical community is really into this idea that they get to see parents and young adults or youth interact, so they get a sense of the family nature. So you like the specific product components. And by the way, Kristen made this list by pulling it out of the Bright Futures. But what is harder for us to think about and talk about are things like, what is the benefit of this product, right? What do young people get out of it when they go to a well visit? Or what do parents get out of it, since we could be talking about different audiences here, even though our focus for today is young people. So the benefits. The other part of it is like the deliverables, or what do they walk away with, right? They go to this thing, they have this experience, do they tangibly get something out of it, whether it's a piece of paper or a text message or whatever, that sort of stuff. So product deliverables, what else have I got here? Product experiences, right? If we're just talking about the fact that they really value experience, what is it like for them to be there, right? Or what is it like for them to even make the appointment? All of this stuff comes together when we're considering the product. Other factors that we're going to think about, right, when we're looking at this is the price of it. We all know that for the most part, well visits are free to the parent and the young person, but what about not monetarily, right? Are there emotional costs possibly here, or mental health costs, or family relationship costs that might be involved in there? That's another thing that we try to think of. I don't see place on this version of this, but you can imagine another question would be, does it always have to be in the same boring clinical office? And what does that place look like? And is that place got Wi-Fi? Because if it doesn't, I'm not going. All of those sort of considerations. So this is the marketing worksheet, and I'm going to show you a couple more pages from this because, like I said, I've evolved it a little bit. So when you download it, there's just a few little glips here from some of the different marketing research organizations that I've been getting the information from, and we'll talk about some of these a little bit more later. Our colleagues have been doing research on this front too. Oregon, Iowa, New Mexico, who else has been doing? Minnesota's doing youth research, trying to get in and understand what young people think about this well visit. And then this version right here is from young people in themselves talking about it. Down here we've got another marketing resource that's saying what do young people really actually care about. I don't see the well visit on there, but I do see things like fitness and fitness. So interesting, right? Maybe there's a different way. Here's health and wellness down here for millennials, but not so much for Gen Z. And what does that mean to us, right? Here is that marketing analysis that I was talking about before. We were just looking at that. It's got some examples from states in here now. We're going to talk a lot more about what New Mexico has been doing, which is awesomeness. This is Iowa's campaign that's focused on parents as a target audience. This is, again, just a sampler for you to take a look at things and maybe follow up if there's things that interest you. And here's the new stuff, right? We have not talked about this very much because, frankly, it's dry as dirt and really geeky. There's a bunch of other tools, including how you build an evaluation plan for a communication campaign, or how you identify what measures might be actually good for a communications campaign that you're doing. And then finally, there's more of those. Oh, how you do an audience or a media brainstorming, right? This is, again, planning. How do you sit down and figure out what kind of media you're going to be in or how you're going to get your message delivered to the audiences that you're talking to? Oh, so much. Communication strategy worksheet. Again, just the discipline of sitting down and thinking it through. And then finally, yeah, you don't care about that page. So some awesome things happening in the chat over here. Wyoming has a youth survey developed by youth, so fabulous, another resource that we can take advantage of here. Texas is now working with using Iowa's ideas with the parents thing. And absolutely, I really think it's safe for me to say, when it comes to the adolescent health community, if you can use what they've got, they would really like it if you did. So always nice to check, but again, that's why we're showing you so much of the stuff that exists, because why reinvent the wheel? All right. Okay. Folks that are not, that have been here before, I still don't need you quite yet. Hold on a minute. We got one more thing to cover. Based on all of this analysis and the document that you'll take a look at when you get there, right? What we've been talking about collectively is that there's some pretty big challenges to selling, quote unquote, the well visit to adolescents and young adults. First off, we really have not stumbled onto a really compelling benefit or reason to care when we're specifically talking about the well visit, right? There's some reasons that they think it's a good thing, but so far, and I would love to know if anyone's got news on this, we have not heard like, oh my gosh, that's fabulous, I really want to go to that. Nothing super compelling. We've run into a lot of confusion and issues around the name. It varies from state to state. It varies from community to community or clinic to clinic. How we refer to this, I think, is, again, almost part of the sale. Youth-driven marketing. Bottom line of so many of these webinars and almost the entire marketing series is pretty much encapsulated by, so if you're over 28, you probably are not going to be effective at developing marketing or communications or promotions for young people because, no offense, we're old and we don't get it. So back to co-creation, back to youth engagement. If that becomes the central strategy for us in public health, yeah, how are we doing on that? How's that going so far? Some states, super leadership, but it's a hard sale all the way down the line, right? Back to here's Carol's point. It's super hard to get adults to let go of their power. On messaging, right? We get all freaked out and scared. Imagine like trying to convince a big setting of doctors that they need to sit down and rethink how they're going to do their well visit practice based on the perspective of young people, right? So there's a whole back end to my simple, nope, we got to have young people involved, right? And then finally, features and attributes that align with values and pain points. You know, you saw that title slide in the F Your beauty standards, right? If we are coming from a perspective of BMIs and there is only one kind of healthy weight and that is not aligned with how young people are looking at these things, we're having a problem, right? If walking out with test results is so far away from what young people actually care about, we are going to really have a hard time selling this. This was demonstrated a lot at the first coin that was convened around this, where the young people were up talking about, holistic medicine and wanting to understand more cultural influences on food and how the environment plays a role in experiencing nature, and then engagement with learning. And we are all back here at, BMI check and immunizations, right? Right? That's what we need. So again, these are the challenges that we're up against. All right. I'm talking a lot. Here's what we're going to do today. As I said, I've got a bunch of stuff from the marketing experts on adolescents and young adults. The resource list, oh man, well, Rita's going to have that put together for us, since I always forget where I'm getting most of this from. Just an important quick note, all that stuff is super expensive. I've had to kind of look for the free things, which are a little bit out of date, and usually executive summaries. And second, there's no clear answer to anything. The other topic that comes up a lot today, since we're talking about health literacy, is this idea around literacy and education and learning that is also undergoing a transformation. And as we look at those sort of conceptual, high, lofty things, we're going to try to apply them to what we are doing in public health, specific to the well visit, but I'm sure folks that are not into that are going to see ways this becomes relevant to everybody. Again, these seminars, these webinars are notoriously lofty and mushy and more about trying to give you ideas to think differently than giving you a step-by-step on how to actually do this stuff on the back end. My apologies. Happy to work with you technically. Looking to be provocative and give you ideas today. Okay. Let's see. I need everyone's attention again. Here we go. Generational generalizations. This is from the very first webinar, and we've talked about it almost every time since. I want to lay out so that we all are in the same place, understanding what are the different generations. And whether you believe in this or not, because yes, they're generalizations, and I might really be a boomer, but gosh darn it, I identify as Gen X, right? Or millennials being a whole range of 15 to 35, when they're very different at the younger and the older ends of that millennial spectrum. You can see parents have been laid over here as well. For Iowa and a bunch of other states are interested in working on parents of adolescents and young adults as the target audience. Interestingly, young adults are parents, so that's kind of interesting to me that the way we think about parents might need to be a little bit different these days. So I hope you're mentally looking at this and figuring out who you are, where you are. I always ask this question because I got a test question poll. I don't know. Here's my scenario. You're working on your computer, trying to get something done, and all of a sudden you get an error message. It has some arcane like error message XY2253B. Click OK. What do you do? What do you do? Get this error message on your computer. What's the next thing you're going to do now that you got this error message? Could you please type in the chat box what generation you identify as and what you would do when confronted with an obscure and not very clear error message on your computer? What do you do? Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, James. Reboot, Google, bang the keyboard, call a younger person, Google it on the phone, obviously not on my computer. Ooh, Tiffany. Google it. Yes, love it. I would Google the message millennial. Keep going, just plow through it, Google it. Boomer, call my nephew. All right. Way to make the point, y'all. Way to make the point. And Gen X, keep going, just ignore it, right? Because you're like, that's not relevant. Or if it were really serious, I would have had a much bigger problem. So you Google it, and then you end up where, right? You end up at some of these geeky places. Do people hang out on these tech boards? I mean, because I run a lot of fancy software, I end up there a lot. And see if anybody has the same question as I had. Ignore or Google. Keep going, ignore. Find an alternate path. Right on. This whole thing that you guys are talking about here is example of the lookup generation, right? It's not call tech support if you're a millennial or a teenager or a younger person. It's just get online and try to figure it out. And I love the person who's like, I'm just going to do it on my phone because I can do 2 screens at once or maybe 3. Okay, thank you. Feel free to ask questions in the text in the chat box if I'm being too obscure here. This idea of the lookup generation comes out of some conceptual values or identity stuff that the market researchers track to key events as they were growing up, specific to millennials, right? What Apple has done over time with their technology and their interfaces. They've revolutionized music. They've revolutionized how we interact with information, gaming, all of that stuff. They have been riding that Apple innovation wave since the very beginning. Ditto what's happened with Facebook. We went from a time when that sort of thing, that sort of connection or community building application didn't exist to being a core component of the nature of relationships. And so when young people are thinking about technology or the universe or where things are going, right, part of the way they identify is that anything's possible. We can, you know, look at what's happened so far in terms of innovation. It's awesome. So we can do that, and it's going to change. Everything's going to change. Some of this might be resonating under that belief thing with the sort of American individualism as well. Work hard and you can be successful no matter what. But look at the inclusion of age in there. You know what I mean? I think that there's a different spin to that idea, right? That because of technology and the internet, the answer I get to fix that error message might have been from the 12-year-old kid, just like people are like, I call out to my cousin or my younger person, right? So maybe age isn't as critical if we're talking about it from the technology standpoint. But the point I wanted to make here is that innovation is expected and possibility is limitless. They just don't see those kind of barriers. And they become very activist with it. We complain that Apple's upgrading the operating system again. Young people expect it. So some characteristics of the lookup generation. The idea that they can look it up is a default setting, right? All the answers are Google away, as you all just said. The questions young people are having about themselves and their relationship with the world and development and all that are pretty much the same questions across time, but there's a totally new way of them getting the information. Part of this is because technology has made it possible for them to be the creators of the content, right, and the experts and the innovators themselves. And interestingly, because that is so prevalent, when they're looking for some of these answers, a formal expertise label, right, like I'm going to only believe answers from a PhD or a Microsoft certified technician, not so much. More interested in who do I have access to, right, and how close are they to me, and do I have a relationship, and is the sort of place where they're at someplace that I buy into or believe in. This expertise less important than access and relevance, PB Bunny versus Vogue. You know how there's a ton of YouTube how-to videos, right, that compete with the old standards on media that we tend to would rely on as older people, that it's just not the way anymore. I'd much rather learn how to put makeup on from some gal on the internet or on YouTube than I would looking at Vogue magazine. That said, Teen Vogue, anybody? Teen Vogue? Oh my gosh, what an amazing thing. All right, so relationships equal relevance, right? That's the idea that the more connection they have, the more relevant you or the topic or the place is to them. Bureaucracy is perceived as being not accessible. Their reaction to the way we do things in a bureaucratic form gets in their way and is the antithesis of innovation. And they've become so successful in navigating these technology frontiers that they understand how to keep their networks discreet, how to set up accounts, multiple accounts, to make sure that they can divide out things that they want only their friends to see versus what they want their parents to see. Anybody want to react or push back? Sounding right? Sounding aligned with what you've heard and seen? The bureaucracy issue is multi-generational. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I'm thinking older folks have a higher tolerance for, I just kind of expect the DMV to be this way, where I'm wondering if young people are going to be like, yeah, no, I'm not. Nope, not going to bother with that. But I don't know. Discrete networks. Absolutely. Absolutely, and a lot of the stuff I had never heard. To James's point, there's some discussion too about how millennials were kind of the wild west of the internet, where the Gen Z or iGen or founders or whatever are way smarter and better at it. They're not going to post the terrible pictures that are going to keep them away from jobs as readily as millennials used to. The expertise of their peers is much more important to them than the expertise with degrees. Yep, that's what we're seeing a lot of with the conversation. Unless the expertise with degrees can speak to them in their space and coolness. Yeah, absolutely. New Jersey just turned me on to, what is it, Dr. Mike, who's young anyway, but I think we can have old people that are still relevant and valued on YouTube. Yeah. And again, I totally identify as an old person, so I'm saying that with a lot of love and respect. So please forgive if it offends you. Okay, moving on. So setting up this idea that technology is changing the nature of the relationship young people have with information, right? It's instantly accessible. They are contributing to it. It's a back and forth sort of thing. The credibility factor is different for them, so on and so forth, right? It used to be one of my favorite jokes to do my framing presentation and talk about how my definition of framing was taken from Wikipedia. And I would love just to do that in academic audiences just to kind of piss people off. But it's kind of the thing, If you're wondering what this bird thing is over here, one of my favorite little lookup apps is from the, oh my goodness, why am I just flying out of my brain now? Big deal in New York, bird thing. But anyway, you can answer like 10 questions and that will tell you what bird you are looking at. Awesome. Yes, and I do pretend to be a responsible adult, but only on Wednesdays. Okay, so we're changing the nature of the relationship with information. So what is our role in public health? What is public health's role in promoting health literacy? And certainly number one is, well, we got to provide the information. Got to provide the good information. And I think implication number one is, our standard way of providing that information or where it is, right, we got to rethink it if we're talking about adolescents and young adults. You know what I'm saying? Like thinking, and I just pulled Minnesota because it's close to home, but thinking that we're going to drive people to our state agency's website as it exists now, or even, no offense, University of Minnesota website. Yeah, no. The sheer issues around navigation are problematic. I'm not saying it can't be better. I'm not saying we can't fix it, and I'm not saying that some young people would be compelled to find this valid and interesting and useful, but in general, not so much. So where should we be? And here is just a pull down from some health bulletin board someplace, and I keep wondering and I keep pushing this idea of why aren't we where they are? Why aren't we putting our information into places that are already relevant, where young people already are, and they're already asking the questions about it? Who's familiar with these boards? Does anybody, and I invite you to take off the mute, which is *6. I see some hands going up, but I'm just curious, like, nobody's ever pushed back on me about this idea except to say that doctors can't do this because it would be perceived as actual medical advice, and then they would be really in big trouble. And then I push back and say, well, maybe young people, we could educate young people and they could be the ones, and then we could do quality control. I don't really know. I'm just curious, does anybody have experience with these things or any insights on how we as public health could be using these places to get our information out there?
So this is Shelley, and I do something kind of creepy. I shouldn't probably be admitting this out loud. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go creepy.
My teenager who uses these sites will come up with some that she feels like people are getting really, really, really bad advice from their peers on. And she'll be like, so Mom, like, how are we going to tell them this? And so she just said, well, hey, my mom's a nurse, and I asked her about this, and this is what she said. So it's not really creepy because I'm not, like, stalking these sites, but my daughter uses them, and then when she finds some that are particularly problematic, so I don't know how we, like, make that nationwide or something, but that's one fun way that we can do it. The one thing that I wanted to tell you, there's some of these that are actually apps where the kids talk to each other, and some of them get really creepy. They get to be, they go from health to like hookup really quick, and they're well-promoted apps, and they look legitimate, but they really go from questions to much deeper questions and then turning into hooking up pretty quickly after that. So you have to be really careful with these.
Right on. And okay, so much to unpack from your comments. Thank you very much. And I want to hear more from other people, but like just right there, right? Like what happens if we at Public Health decide we're not about the information provision, we're about the information quality control checks? You know? And our job is to monitor this stuff or figure out some way to have young people monitoring it and engaging us to check in, like, oh, this is appearing like a health app, but it's not really, you know, hey, public health, maybe you better talk to these people or get a warning label slapped on there. Or, do you know what I mean? Or, wow, there's a whole thread going on Reddit about why doctors do X, Y, and Z that's totally wrong. Can somebody jump in on there? That's what I get from what Shelley just said. And again, I don't know how we would do that, but it's not that different from youth programming. It's just virtual, isn't it? Kind of? Maybe? I don't know. Who else has got something? Anybody else? What did Becca mean by yes, but normally ones with expert advice are not free, right? Like where you have to, you actually kind of contract with somebody to give you a perspective on that? Right on, okay. What do you mean by piggybacking, Carol? *6.
#6 to unmute.
So it was just the idea of adding to, it's just the idea of adding to what's already out there. Instead of creating our own website or whatever, it's like how do we infiltrate or piggyback on what's already out there?
I love it. Infiltration. So not my area of expertise, but most of these boards have moderators who may or may not be paid people, may or may not be part of the community, but they usually have moderators that are kind of making sure that stuff doesn't go terribly, terribly wrong. That could be our job. A lot of times places like this have opportunities for experts or people with insights. It's almost like like a press briefing or something, but it's on one of these. You know, on Reddit it's like ask me anything. On these it's, you know, Dr. Jones is going to be here talking about puberty. Be ready with your questions. They do it on Twitter. I'm not a Facebook person. I know that's embarrassing, but I'm sure there's an equivalent of that, right? So besides like the sneaky stuff that we're talking about, there are formal roles. I just don't know how we scale this or break in. Always looking for answers, though. We should get a grant for that or something, shouldn't we? Okay, anyway, moving on. Implication of where we deliver the information, and then I got to look at the other side of this, how we capture the information. I stole this from SlideShare. We were talking at a at a conference about, like, a young person walks into the well visit and gets handed a clipboard and a sheaf of papers to fill out. What are they thinking? What do they think of us right about then? Yeah. Yep. And again, I think an old person response to this is, gosh darn it, you know, kids need to know how to handwrite, and we need to keep these things because those are important skills to have, and I am not dismissing the need for people to handwrite. And maybe it is true that using paper forms is the most efficient way for a clinic to run. Doubt it. But from a marketer's perspective, you need to know the minute you hand them a piece of paper, they're thinking, oh, this place is a mess. And James beautifully articulates that. Couldn't I have done this online before I came in? Or don't you have a link? I could just do it on my phone. I got an autofill feature, you know. And how many adults do you feel like this way too sometimes now? Oh my God, especially with old people. I take old people into the doctor and they're like, hand my father with Alzheimer's a form to fill out. I'm like, yeah, so that's not going to happen. What are you thinking? All right, anyway, sorry, a little bit of a rant. There we go. All right, enough about the information part. Some clinics are using iPads, but right on, exactly. And again, I know there's risks to that. I know there's issues, and we're converting and all of this sort of stuff, uptake, all of that. I know. But I just want to be clear that I think that clinic efficiency and quality control as a reason why to do that stuff is matched by these younger generations are going to require it from us. Let's see, Texas funded some clinics so they could get the iPads. The form process for youth and young adults has been terrible. We've been doing a project around that. Cool. That would be a really cool thing to see. Because, like, I'm wondering what K-Cross or Carol, how did you sell? How did they sell the iPads? Do you know what I mean? Like, what did it take to get there? Because, again, I'm all good with this lofty idea stuff, but that really sitting down and getting a clinic to make that investment in the iPads, or getting public health to fund the iPads or whatever. We need those stories too. All right, another day, make it part of a grant. Absolutely. Right, and you're saying, Carol, you could do that like as part of your COIN project or some of your public health projects. You could force that stuff in there. Good security applications, they're grant funded, right. And that's a huge thing too, I'm imagining. I heard that in another thing. They're like, well, we can't have Wi-Fi in the clinics because of security. I'm like, I don't know. I got it in the lineup. If one can, I don't know. But again, all right, moving on. Thank you. Excellent comments. Appreciate it. All right, so I said this was about health literacy. Here we go. Health, unlike a lot of this marketing stuff, this quote, health literacy thing seems to have some very well-defined or some conceptual foundations that have traction in public health, right? And clearly it goes beyond providing information. I'm just wondering, when you see this phrase, health literacy, do you have an immediate reaction? What does that mean to you? What does health literacy mean in the context of public health? Or even if you want to say it in the context of the adolescent young adult well visit. Anybody want to give me a little chat of what that means to you? You know I'm going to give you definitions. I'm just curious. Understanding the medical issues with myself or kids. Right on. Getting at the understanding there. The ability to navigate within the healthcare system. Fabulous, right? So it's the medical issues, the medicine, but the system as well. Ability to understand the basics of how the health system works and how to navigate the system. Okay, you guys are very very thoughtful here. Not a lot of people get into the systemic stuff. Right on. Anybody else? I'm moving on. All right. It's going to become really obvious right now that I have a lot of problems with health literacy as I learned it through through my work here. Shelley says, how to read the forms, right on. Understand what your provider is saying and act on their direction, diagnosis, etc. Okay, now Sally's point here is part of why this stuff makes me a little bit angry. And Tracy says, how do I know if I'm healthy? Yeah, it kind of boils down to all that, doesn't it? And it makes it weird, doesn't it, Tracy, that we're like, it should be about am I healthy, but it's also about how do I navigate this giant system that gets in the way. Yeah, and understanding the medical vocabulary. So between that comment from Kate Cross and Sally's, right, you have to understand what they are saying, or we have to, the young people need to step up and be able to understand what it is we are saying to them. Is there anything kind of weird with that, direction, maybe? And that's where I get frustrated, right? That we make this a lot about, you know, they have to be able to read and do the math to act on the information that we give them. This is a World Health Organization pull out right here, right? As opposed to us in public health or us in clinical services needing to provide the stuff in a way that adolescents, young adults, and old people can understand it. And that tension between what we should be doing, what they should be doing, both and, is what kind of frustrates me a little bit here. I like the second one slightly better, where we're saying that there's a lot of different skills and competencies here, right, where they can actually, you know, engage with the health information and make their own choices about these sort of issues, but it still is distilling all this down to almost an individual level of interaction. And so from my thinking, right, our role in public health on the health literacy front is to really be strategic in how we deliver the information. Young people need to understand reproductive health and their choices around birth control, but do we think that this threefold brochure is a way that we are effectively going to make them literate about these options? Nope. I mean, just the fact that it's a threefold brochure. And so many words, right? And, like, I picked birth control because, like, there's a benefit to being on birth control. So, like, totally think that if there was something that young people would be willing to dive into and actually work through to get there, it would be something like this. But still, oh, my gosh. And we can do better. We totally can do better. Here's from the Bedsigner in the national campaign, right? They clearly thought through the ways to present this information so that it was understandable, readable, engaging, easy to get through, right, and aligned with how young people are looking at and dealing with information right now. Better yet, I don't remember who said it before, but having it as an app, a question and answer app, using the pictures, right? Streamlining away from text into visuals that help people get through the content. Bam. And yeah, this is just good design and good graphics and all that sort of stuff, but it is spending a lot of time thinking about the audience and what they need. And let's take it even further, right? And I am not saying that this is the best way to deliver medical information to young people, but if we were really serious about working with young people to, like engage with this content, maybe the point isn't that these memes teach others, but that they give young people the experience to learn themselves. Interesting, huh? Especially something like we give them insurance, they don't use it. How they got to that thought means that they were engaged in a learning process, right? The fact that, you know, being honest and engaging with their doctor is an important thing. Again, you're not going to get that from a brochure. You have to learn it and experience it. It affects dosage of a message as well. Yep, right on. Because you can consume these things all day. You're not going to read a giant brochure or a 20-page publication. So more about New Mexico. How did New Mexico get this approved through their DOH? Right, so this was a youth contest or competition. So I don't think these actually ran in major media, but they were part of the youth media campaign developed by young people as part of their programming. Does that make sense? Because like I said, for me as a marketing person, I don't care that this gets, 70,000 exposures on Facebook. That would be nice. What I care about is the young person that came up with this and how far along the path they got to because they were engaged in the process, right? They really sat down and thought about what's important when they go to a doctor. All right, sorry, rambling, sorry. Okay, even further, where do we go? We got the information access. Okay, so I want to one-up this health literacy thing again. This is like when we're studying the adolescent well visit, right? Like, what does it take to get, here's the challenge. We want to increase adolescent well visit rates. We need to change the attitudes of adolescents and their parents to encourage them to prioritize prevention, health, and annual checkups. And that sounds so simple and straightforward, doesn't it? But like behind all of that, oh my gosh, there's so much to it, so much more. And really, it's about that learning and adoption process. And will this ever happen through like one exposure to a meme or one brochure or getting a note from a doctor, like this whole thing about changing attitudes and really creating it as a priority? Absolutely not. It's a much more extensive process. All right, I want to go to Tracy's thing and how many of their friends they share the messaging with as a result. Right, exactly. Yeah, and sharing the message or telling the story of making the message, or do you know what I mean? Like, right on, right on. I love that. If we could figure out how to change attitudes, we could change the world. Yes, exactly. Or sell a lot of cars or something. So the thing I want to add into this idea around health literacy is that whole learning process. Because suddenly, you know, we're moving away from we're just statically providing information, or we're just, you know, the kids can just look it up, right? There's way more packed into this process, and it suggests that, you know, what we as people in systems or people in clinics or people as medical professionals are doing or not doing is really the question here. And this is, again, kind of where I get a little bit angry, that if we're just like, hey, you know, we have told people over and over again that they're supposed to come in for an annual well visit. That's the full sum of our responsibility here, right? I just am not buying it. Because if they're not coming, if the rates are not moving, and we have consistently told people that, then we are not affecting the change, and therefore it's on us that this is the case and this is what is happening, and apply that to any of these health issues. I was just reading something about HIV, right, and that young people they didn't grow up in an era where HIV was potentially could kill you, right, like I did. And so it's just not taken that seriously, and it's not taught in sex ed, they're not getting screened, all these sort of things, and yet the blame or the finger pointing tends to be on young people because, like, everybody said HIV is a problem, you need to be protection, and blah, 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 right? So I'm continually looking for what is the system's role here. All right, Carol, do we need to back it up a little bit and say don't care about the attitude but need to change the behavior, right? And I think those are totally intertwined. And maybe you're right. Maybe we don't need to have a positive attitude to get them to change the behavior. That's why some people, like in marketing, like they put prices, promotion. If it's free, maybe I don't need a really big, you know, mental attitudinal shift, but they're going to come in because they get a free movie pass or something like that. So there's a lot of marketing strategies that play off of what Carol's getting at here. All right, so here is another quote that was really striking to me. It's from an article called Health Literacy is a Social Justice Issue That Affects Us All. It was in an adult learning publication because, again, this seems to span into the learning and education field. And so I was trying to get a sense of what this could mean for us in the big picture. And what they're doing is, you know, expanding the model of health literacy even further to say, if we continue to use the medical model sort of deficiency approach, instead of going from the, you know, young people or people have inherent skills and capacities and strengths and are doing things right now to keep themselves alive or keep themselves healthy, and how do we tap into that or leverage that or make the most of that? That's what I'm thinking about right here with this social justice thing. And I think with young people, we got a particularly cool opportunity because they're so good at the lookup and the technology stuff. not to mention the content creation, not to mention, right? There's so much that they would bring to the party when we come to this discussion about health literacy. I'm really struck by how do we get there with them and how can they inform what we're doing and how we do it. So where I like to end up on this whole discussion around health literacy, and again, I would love some pushback here because I feel like I'm taking this well away from what is traditionally discussed, and I don't know if that's, you know, too much or not, but that instead of making this about these individual skills, dealing with the health information, looking at the play between the systems and the individual skills, right? And how is that interaction happening? So it's a both and sort of situation, and because we are all the health systems people, the question becomes, what do we do? I put the do you speak English thing up here because, again, I think that the traditional English language dominance of what we try to do and all the attitudes that get triggered when we suggest that perhaps we need to have more language abilities in our clinical settings. Do you know what I mean? That's the tension. Again, are we more about holding on to our own systems and the ways we do things, or are we going to go where we need to go to support the people that we're going to see? And again, I know that becomes political, but there we go. Okay. Moving on. I know, soapbox. Okay, so now this is getting, I'm pushing really, really, really far now. Because I think that the implication really is that we need to evolve our role. So that we are in the process. Using technology as young people do and insinuating health and health aspects into the dialogue. I'm going to let you read some of those things on there while I look at your notes. Especially with adolescents, we need to set aside attitudes and observe what changes behavior, even if it is accompanied by disdain. Yep, right on. Right on. And I love how you're saying even if it's accompanied by disdain, because I feel like that's exactly what we run into all the time. And a lot of you know my big other push is like using that disdain or that emotional reaction to educate around adolescent development, because I think all this stuff tracks into the development. Unfortunately, the healthcare IT is way behind Apple. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think some of the innovation that's happening from technology is going to be impacting healthcare. Do you guys remember that one slide I had, one of the first webinars where it was like those groovy new places that are like yoga studio, fruit bar, doctor's office, weight room, like, do you know what I mean? Like this super different way of looking at clinical health experience. Or the rise of the wearables market, right? Like if your iWatch can track your blood pressure and glucose levels and, right, besides your steps, besides, you know, didn't one of you have the idea about turning your iPhone like into a modified mood ring so you can sort of gauge your own stress levels and maybe the app, just like with your walking, can track it and trend it. Oh my God, look at how stressed out I get every time I walk past Starbucks or I don't know, whatever, right? Or the sports stadium or the, oh, I'm getting a little crazy now. How about the, I walk past a fraternity and I'm a woman, my stress level raises. Couldn't we do a big study and then we could track it and then have evidence? Okay, sorry, fraternity friends. Shelly, I need that so bad, right? They've got it in shoes. So, and again, this is kind of gross because I'm talking consumer packaged goods and marketing and we're just all about selling stuff and making a buck. And I do think that these things are going to trigger change in healthcare as well. And to Carol's point, way slower than we would ever want it to be. But again, if we could partner with young people, maybe we could find an innovation to this. All right, so the thing about where this gal is coming from, right, is broadening or getting a different way of thinking about this learning thing. And that the process or the adventure or the experience in and of itself has value and is an engagement, and that should be ultimately what we're trying to work on here. She also points out, and again, I'm sorry if this is broken record time, I like the way she says that the paradox is we are all products of a traditional schooling system, and we are tasked with trying to design future relevant education. So just fill in public health and medical systems, and I think that we collectively are in that same spot. And I push to you guys that are in the systems, is there anybody more on the bleeding edge of this than adolescent health? Because that's a whole other systems approach would be to see who's doing this stuff and partner up with them, right? Like, are the environmental people kind of hip and cool and getting into the use of new technologies, or transportation? You know, so that GIS mapping stuff, that's pretty innovative. I don't know. But I just really want to honor what Carol and others are saying about the challenge within the system. The oil and gas industries, that's part of the challenge. OAH is part of the whole. Right, where were you going with the oil and gas, Shelley? Like, because they got so much money, they're pound sticks if you want to talk, or not. Totally up to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can talk much better than I can type. They're really look at some of the marketing for young people for the oil and gas industry and the coal industry. Some of those industries that are starting to come back a little bit right now, they are really looking for those young 20-somethings. I think it was Dino Nobel that I saw the best advertising on. But they're really getting that, they must have some really cool young people working with them, because they're getting it when it comes to the advertising for people to come work for them. So there have been some, I think the first place I saw an ad was actually on Facebook, and I'm like, I don't know why off my Facebook you figured out that I should come work for Dino Nobel, because that's not it. But yeah, I'll see if I can find some, and I can even send them out to like the listserv or something like that, because some of them have some really, you know, because we talked earlier about this, but starting to ask who cares about my work. Well, who cares about the people who are going to be healthy as they transition to adulthood? It's the #1 employers in our communities. And some of them have really good advertising. And that might help us get some ideas. And they have big bucks to spend on advertising. So they can spend the big bucks, and then we can rip it off in our own way.
Right on, right on. And I bet, and they, as evidenced by what you're saying, there's a huge struggle with how do these traditional corporate environments manage millennials and Gen Z folks, because they don't dig that whole scene. They don't dig hierarchy, they don't dig cubicles, they don't dig, you know, 9-to-5 work days, and they're really struggling both to recruit them, because I think pretty safe to say millennials and Gen Z would be like, oil and gas, evil.
Yeah, except I mean, I have a weekend job where I interact with a lot of millennials, and they're taking them and they're making a lot of good money doing that. It's mainly the young people that just have high school degrees and are not currently going on to college that are working in those industries, and they're marketing really hard to those industries, because they're wanting. The problem that they're running into is they're still thinking like baby boomers, like they want them there for the next 40 years, but that's not going to happen.
With these guys, with the young people. Awesome.
Yeah.
What a great point. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
But look at some of the advertising for some of the companies. The other one is like, just look at some of like what Google and Yahoo's advertising looks like. And you can Google that pretty easily online. Like job search, millennial Google, and you'll find like all kinds of advertising flyers and stuff like that that give you ideas. It's how I get some of my better ideas for like arranging things, even on slides for young people and stuff like that.
I love it. I love it, because they do have the resources. Very cool. Thanks, Shelley.
No problem.
All right, so wrapping up this radical thinking here, I just want to read you one of the things that they say in this book, and Shelley was getting at this point as well, right? It's around relevance requires a level of engagement, right? And so what she says here is creating relevance, in other words, is the major challenge. At the same time, a part of our path is dictated by the developments in the world, changing economy, social and cultural makeup, and exhausted ecology. Much of what is relevant is determined by the need to redesign the systems in which we live and the clues for which will emerge from a sincere engagement between the systems and the young people. don't know what that looks like, but I do think it's what you all strive for with youth engagement and where we need to be thinking about how to get there next. All right, that's big and lofty. Let me get really specific now. Okay, did read some journal articles. I did read a couple things, tried to find specific examples of how traditional approaches have expanded beyond just providing straight up information. And so here's one from the NIH, right? And one of the big areas of emphasis in this report was about consumer access to information. What they're reframing information as is consumer-centric information, meaning that it helps people manage wellness, get personal health care decisions made, et cetera, et cetera. And so what they're trying to do then is figure out how to make it accessible and personalized based on the diversity of needs or cultural traditions or socioeconomics or whatever it's going to be. And so in addition to having this sort of, I think this one was a portal, right? It wasn't just data. It was a whole host of different things that could be used by whoever it is, the customer, the person engaged in this process or this study, right, to get all of this in one place, adapted and targeted for them, who they are. And this was 2004, where they were already talking about this sort of stuff. And again, we all probably read this and go, yeah, I know exactly what that was going to look like, right? They're just going to have, you know, different cultural things in there or gendered or something like that. But directionally, this is what I'm talking about, is how do we get it to this level where it's not just information, it's targeted, it's customized, and it's back and forth. Here's another one, a home-based computerized system that, again, has a back end of information that can tailor what it spits out and work with people, patients, whatever, throughout the entire process as opposed to just dumping straight up information. And I think this one was an actual study. Let me look at my notes again. It was a home-based computerized system that provides the patients with the information, decision support, advice, etc. In testing the impact of their system, they found that those who participated were more competent at finding information, more comfortable participating in care, and had more confidence in the doctor's higher quality of life. So again, I think that this stuff, and I don't have a year on this one. I have it on here. No, I don't have it on my notes either. Sorry about that. Clearly this stuff is happening. Can we find a way to tap into it and customize it for what we're trying to do? Something called Teach Back. Cool. Tracy, will you jump on and say more? Health Literacy Tool. Pound 6, is that right? Hello. Uh-oh, we're still not hearing Tracy. No pressure.
How about now?
Oh, I hear you now.
Awesome. So I just got this email that came in, and it was actually focused from, it's called the intersection of health equality, or excuse me, health equity and health literacy. And I clicked on the link, and it's really actually, it comes from a listserv that I participate on that's focused on children. And I clicked on it, and it brought me to an AHRQ site that talks about this teach back method and how we providers, I'm not a provider, but our community of providers should be using words that are an educational level and appropriateness for the community that we're serving, whether they're 5-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 85-year-olds. And the link I just put on that chat feature for you was focused on a toolkit that apparently is available. Now, again, probably more practical for those of us on the phone from a health educational standpoint than more for like our adolescent or young adult community. But again, it's my very first glance at it, so maybe something worth taking a look at another time. Right
on. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's fabulous. And I think that maybe what Tracy's giving us here is like another, like if we were to move forward on that, it's a both sides, systems and individual, that this could tactically make some progress on that front. All right, Carol's saying, I got a brother working on a Crohn's disease app that looks like a game, like Candy Crush, that patients use to monitor diseases. Right on, that you're in levels if they're successful. I think we've seen some of that work with some of the sex ed or teen pregnancy before. I haven't seen Shelley's the participation game. Do you have 30 seconds to jump on, Shelley? Pound 6.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Yeah, so the participation game is really cool. That's actually a book that's available now. They've been doing this study since, I think, 2008. It's over 3,000 case studies about, they basically look at what drives people to participate in their favorite brands. So it's basically all about marketing, and they especially look at how important brand use is to young people. But the page that I gave you a link to is the News You Can Use page. And literally there's like, what did they say, 3,000 60-second case studies from marketing. And like some of my favorites are like you go on to like the experimental and like Jack in the Box launches Crave Crasher game to promote new menu items. And so, but it really helps you understand like how are they marketing right now to our young people? Some of it's young adults. I mean, there is some alcohol and things like that on here. But you can really go through these, and there's literally thousands and thousands of these little case studies with pictures and what worked and what didn't work. And so I just kind of like to go through and sometimes think like, a young person would really like to read this. So what does it look like? Why would this be important to me? It talks about ways to use Snapchat for advertising, ways that people have like really creatively gotten things to happen on Snapchat, like they've used it for surveys. Snapchat's a great place to do yes or no surveys or like choose one answer or the other surveys. So that's kind of, it's kind of just a neat another resource. I don't think it's going to answer any of our questions, but I think it gives us ideas about what people are doing out there who have the money to do it, because we don't.
And it sounds like they've got some what's working, what's not working thing.
Yeah, like, I mean, here's a quote when JCPenney introduces the pound, here I am, to support plus-sized shoppers. And so, you know, so what are they doing there? What's the 3-minute video that they're using to really show young people of all sizes that this is something that they really want to shop there now? So it fits into so many of the things that we do, maybe not in the ways that we think, but we can just think outside the box on that. Like Crayola encourages millennials to share art with an edge. And it's a contest that Crayola is doing, but they're receiving an average of 40.8 engagements per tweet right now on the art with an edge, which is not bad. That was within the first, yeah, the hashtag mentions increased by 614% through what they were doing. So it gives just, and they're literally like 4 paragraphs. It's not like reading a study. It gives you like what they've done to do all of these things and to reach more of the millennial audience than what, you know, if we tried to search through all of those, it would be really hard. It's really concentrated, so it's easy to just kind of look for good ideas when you're looking for one.
Absolutely, because again, the stuff we're talking about here is so bleeding edge as to there are no step-by-steps. And the people that are doing it are the ones that Shelley's talking about right here. And that's who we're trying to look for and emulate and beg, borrow, and steal their ideas to see where it's going to go.
Well, and we'll never have the money. We barely have the money to do our work. We're not going to have the money to be able to do, you know, marketing research. That's like so far off. So I think when we can take from what people are doing that have the money, that are spending massive amounts of money on this, then I think it gives us an edge and helps us spread our message better.
Right on. And I would say, though, that like for what we lack in money resources, you all have relationships that are much more significant and actionable, I think, than consumer brands are ever going to have. You know what I mean? When I think about how many young people, somebody like Shelley or Carol or Andra, touch through a teen pregnancy program or a youth development program or whatever it is, that's an amazing asset that we have to figure out how we can take advantage of. And I know that sounds a little mercenary in how I framed it, but it really is a strength of ours. So, and y'all know how to do it really well. And yes, Pokemon Go, what's the health version? What's the health version of Pokemon Go? I mean, some people even thought it was a health version because it involved moving around, right? Okay, here, this is a very heady slide. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to give you little nibbles of this so that then you can look at it and play with it later. There's a group here at the University of Minnesota that I took a class from called the Leapfrog Institute, and these people are trying to revision what education is going to look like in the generation of the lookup technology era and how it's changing young people's relationship with learning. And they call young people today nomads. You can see the little cute spelling there, nomads, right? And they're not talking just specifically about young people, but they're saying the way all of us are changing our relationship with learning, but of course it's going to skew to young people moreover, right? And I love this list because it really makes me think differently about what we are trying to do. And I've just distilled this a little bit into, I was going to ask you all to come up with some ideas, right? Like, what could be public health's role in providing sort of tacit experiences of health, right? Instead of, oh, kids, go get a well visit every year, could we, this is a terrible idea, but this is what I'm trying to get at with tacit experiences, like, is there tour the clinic or tour the testing facility or shadow a doctor for a day? Do you know what I mean? Like making it something experiential that then is being held onto to move them through this process of, oh, I just know I should, to, oh, wow, this is really something for me. I learned about it. It's meaningful. It's relevant. La 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 la. All right, nomads. How do we create an opportunity for them to apply their expertise in social configurations? Okay, some of the language is a little geeky here, right? But still, I'm back to those bullets and boards, right? And again, I've said this idea a million times. Peer educators, yes, in person. Yes, peer educators online. And what would that system look like? How do we enable collaboration, right? If we're afraid that we can't put young people around a conference room table with doctors, I know that's terrible. We shouldn't be afraid, but there it is. More afraid of the doctors. No offense, doctors. Are there ways to do that online or through technology? New cultures, and I literally mean like new cultures like the medical community as a culture, or institutional health as a culture, or insurance as a culture, right? How do we give them the opportunity to engage in this and actually have to navigate it as part of a learning process instead of a hoop that one must jump through to get to something? You can see where I'm trying to go. Taking little prompts out of this list to generate new ideas for how we're approaching the well visit marketing. Okay, so I think I had something sarcastic to say here. Yes, I did, because, yeah, good luck with that. But here's a different version of it that I thought was really cool. This is, again, coming out of these education technologists, right? And again, I want to think, oh, I just read this one to you. Oh, I already did it. Relevance, though. Always, always, always about relevance and how do we create it and how do we get there. And that leads into just the last bigger conceptual thing that I wanted to lay on you. In the readings that I've been doing about health literacy, right, the ones that get more expansive start to bleed into another area called, this is what they called it, it's called health competence. And what they're saying here is that health competence is about healthy behavior and health promoting lifestyle as being the end goal of this as opposed to health literacy, right? So it's not just knowing it, it's living it. I'm going to read a little bit more so I can make this clear, right? But health competence seems to deal with motivation and strategies for lifestyle and behavior rather than just the ability to obtain, read, interpret, understand, and act on health information. See where they're trying to go with this? I'm trying to take it to the next level to address the idea that, like, it's not just having the information or the skills, it's also having this motivation, or having it be as relevant and engaged into your world and life so that you're into it. Motivational interviewing, right on. Yep. Folks know what that is. The idea that the way you interact with somebody and the kind of questions that you ask is tapping into motivation as opposed to just being about gathering or containing information. And what I come up with here is that the more the more I think about it, my hang up about doing media literacy, it's the same as health literacy on some level. Right? Because the ability to kind of translate, engage, understand content and make it relevant, right, is the process of creating a media or a message or experiencing, you know, a meme or a video or a joke or something like that. You have to be able to do that for it to make sense and for you to communicate it. So I sort of had this like, wow, geez, that makes a lot of sense to me. All right, Shelley says, same transition happened with cultural literacy to competency in the healthcare world. Right on, right on. Right, sort of upping the ante of it's not enough for you to know that that's how folks from this group act. You need to be able to competently engage in that world. All right, so media literacy, long time passion of mine for obvious reasons, but also because of technology, because of health. And New Mexico, they were on the first round coin groups. They did a media literacy, health literacy, youth engagement process. And obviously I am not Tessa. And depending on what you guys think, I would love to see if we want to do a big version where Tessa and her team talk more about how they handled this. But just really briefly, and I said some of this before, right? Yeah, it was about developing social media marketing materials in order to improve the adolescent and young adult well visits via things like the partnerships and youth health literacy. You see how they're packing this in here? And they did this through grassroots youth programming, building up to these summits, right? And so they would do these on-the-ground programs where they would work through media and health literacy kind of topics, culminating in the kind of memes and the things that I showed you before that were then competing for attention and prizes, et cetera, at these summits. So this was grassroots and then pulling people together for a larger event and activity to increase the engagement level. And they put together a whole youth health literacy toolkit, right? So this is like just a little programming outline of how they would teach this stuff and how they would work on it with young people at those events and seminars. This was really interesting to me that across all of them, when they started talking to young people about what are they thinking about when it comes to health, this was young people's segmentation on the areas of health, not the medical people, not public health, but this is how the young people divided it up. And thinking way back to that first thing that I was showing you with like the marketing analysis, right? I mean, yeah, so different than the way we would do it as old people or as adults or as people within the system, right? Spiritual and soul being on there, far out, far out. And so using the way young people dichotomized what comes in together in health, they created like a big information resource campaign stuff for the clinics. And the clinics would then every month pick one of these topics. Sorry, I didn't put that one in here. Pick one of these topics to highlight. And New Mexico gave them, you know, already created materials to use to promote these different areas. But that's not the part that I love as much as I do, this idea that they used media literacy to teach health literacy, to engage people in health, to improve well visit participation rates. This little logo they have here, Know Your Health, right, was developed by a youngerish person. But this is really interesting to me that the tagline is Know Your Health as a way to promote the well visit. So there's an empowerment message there. There's an engagement, a relevance message, et cetera, et cetera. All right. I'm out of my brain now. I do not have any more smart things to say because I'm coming up on the end of this now. I'm looking at my notes to see did I really have something intelligent to say. No, I do not. Opportunities. Yeah, I don't know what I meant. I don't know what I meant by those. Sorry. But point again. We are so not there yet. But like hearing what you guys think about these things and where you're going and where your resources are gets me really excited and makes me feel like we've got some traction and we can move this stuff forward. This is officially the last webinar in the series. With 1 minute remaining, I'm just going to ask you all in your evaluation or wherever it's appropriate, you can put it in the chat here, what next? I probably will repeat the series so that we can pull more people in to hear it and engage and think about things. But the two things that are really sticking in my head, one came up in Iowa last week, which was the Iowans were like, yeah, that's all well and good youth engagement, but I can't sell that. How do I sell it? So I'm thinking about doing another webinar about how do we sell the idea of youth engagement and co-creation to our management. And then the other thing that I've really been desperate to do is to, again, let New Mexico talk all their stuff. If you've got other ideas or you really like one of these, let me know. I think the next National Strategy Team webinar, I'm going to talk more about some of those forms and the strategy documents. Yeah, okay, good, Tessa, absolutely. Those forms that I put on that marketing worksheet, it's dry, but it's a tool. Happy to talk about that tool with anybody, anytime. Those are for you to use and download, do whatever you want. But that's it. That's what I got. I had a great time doing these webinars. I really, really appreciate all of you willing to jump in, do this talking, jumping in on the chat, comment sections, all that sort of work. So thank you so much for doing all that. It makes these things so much less painful and so much more interesting for me and I think everybody. So thank you. Brenda, thank you for the note. That was awesome. Anybody wanting to pursue any of these ideas, you would make my day if you called and said, you know that thing about doing this, can we talk about that? And I bet there's a whole bunch of adolescent health coordinators to be willing to join us because we're all looking for those kind of answers. All right, so Tessa's a for sure thing. Let me know what else you want to hear about, and thank you all.